himself in. Oh, and every day he doesn't, people will die. Starting tonight. I'm a man of my word. Your brother's soul is mine.
Hey, dreadlocks. Where the bomb buck that was?
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know.
We had to go. Nobody gets that.
So you did it while you were putting your clothes back on, dear.
Your brother's soul.
On the slick how mostly put it in my pocket.
Shut up! Isn't even your pocket, is it, son?
What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Star Explains. We're on the part 2 of The Long Walk. This one, it will be picking up directly after the night of night 2 into the dawn of day 3. And we're just gonna fucking jump right into it. Let's do this shit. Actually, you know what? Before we jump into it, I was told, I got a little feedback from the last video, and I was told that I would kind of reveal things too early, and then when the story progressed to that part, I would say that part, and it was like I was rehashing the same things I already said. And going forward with this next part, it won't be any of that. It'll just be me going straight forward through it. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and have a good one. Also, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Trying to get to 200. Thank you so much, and let's get into it. Okay, so we're on to day 3, and if you're still listening to this, I appreciate it. This is my first book explained. I kind of had to listen to the book a couple of times and write down a lot of this information. I didn't want to leave too much out. Another thing that I left out was the smart boy of the fucking bunch, the one who's always hanging out in the back, Stebbin. It's a reason why Garrity don't like him, because Stebbin's always kind of stayed a step ahead, you know what I'm saying? Even when he bought his own food. He bought like jelly sandwiches and shit. Now Garrity mom, she gave him crackers. I mean, she gave him some homemade cookies and shit, some home-baked cookies. But Stebbins had fucking jelly sandwiches with him. Stebbins also bought an extra pair of shoes. Bro bought some fucking moccasins with him to make every step a little bit more comfortable. So he bought 2 pairs of shoes and he bought food. He came fucking prepared. And again, this is an endurance test. So you gotta be prepared. You gotta know what you can do, what you can't do. It's always best to be prepared. And by him bringing 2 pairs of shoes, he was a lot less worn out than a lot of the other boys. Especially he bought comfortable shoes. So day 3 saw the boys make it halfway through Maine. So they're halfway, both in geography and in body count. By late morning, the survivors were approaching the city of Bangor, one of Maine's largest cities. Though they actually skirted past it via back roads. They didn't go into the actual city. They kind of went around Bangor. So it's like they took the fucking 295 exit or the 285 exit. You know what I'm saying? How you take 285, you go around the city. That's what they kind of did. They went around the city. They had been on their feet now for 48 hours and covered roughly 200 miles. In fact, by 1 p.m. on day 3, they'd logged about 209 miles and reached the vicinity of Milford. Essentially, they traveled halfway through Maine. The strain of 2 sleepless nights was obvious on all the boys' faces. The boys staggered, stumbled even more frequently, and warnings were issued constantly by the ever-present half-track. It was remarkable that any of them could even think straight, let alone maintain this brutal pace. They were essentially walking in a daze, fueled by nothing but meager rations, adrenaline, and willpower. As they passed Bangor's outskirts, the roadside crowds grew larger again. Bangor citizens was out in droves, lining Route 2 with banners and flags, despite the intermediate drizzling rain. Many people carried portable radios to follow live commentary of the walkers. The event was being broadcast on TV nationwide. It was a spectacle, like the Olympics. The walkers saw overhead signs for a Bangor brewing company that flashed in the morning gloom, and they knew They were at a major milestone on a long downhill stretch. Garrity could see from the hilltop a cluster of taller buildings, church spires, Bangor, and beyond that. What's after Bangor? Somebody asked Garrity, who by now had a good sense of the map. After Bangor is Augusta, the state capital, then eventually Kittery, and then New Hampshire state line. About 300 or so miles from here, give or take, Garrity answered wearily. The idea that they had over 300 miles to go was so daunting to the point of absurdity. A quarter of the starting group was still in, but every step was harder than the last. Throughout the morning, the remaining walkers continued to share stories and bond when they had the energy to do it. There was laughter at times, mostly dark humor, as they recounted the ridiculous reasons some of the early walkers went down. The absurd memory of Travis's pants being wrapped around his ankles as he died was brought up a few times, but there was also quiet moments of introspection. The group wondered collectively who among them would be the next one to get their ticket. The specter of death loomed over every milepost. By this point, Scram's health had taken a downturn. The hardy Scram, who earlier had professed determination to keep walking for his wife's sake, began to show signs of illness. He was coughing deep and had even developed a rattling wheeze as he breathed. It didn't take a doctor long to realize Scram had likely caught pneumonia after 2 days of being exposed to the element. His face was flushed with fever and his strength was clearly leaving him. Yet Scram doggedly kept the pace, his jaw set in hard lines. Those concerned glances, everyone loved Scram. He was good-natured and had proven to be one of the strongest walkers. The idea of pneumonia taking him out was painful to accept. By unspoken agreement, the remaining boys made a pact concerning Scram's impending fate. During a rest period, more accurately, during a mental break while walking steadily, Abraham suggested that whoever wins the whole damn thing ought to take care of Scram's widow. The others muttered that it was only right. Garrity took it upon himself to shuffle over to Barkovich, still ostracized, marching alone a short distance behind them, and invited him into this agreement. If Scram doesn't make it, we'll all promise that the winner will set aside some of the prize money for his wife and baby. Are you in? Garrity asked Barkovich. Much to everyone's surprise, Barkovich agreed without his usual assholishness. The isolation had broken Barkovich's spirit. He seemed grateful to be included in anything at all. With that, the group sealed a morbid but heartfelt deal. Scram's family would not suffer if one of them made it to the end. As day 3 wore on, Scram's condition rapidly deteriorated. By mid-afternoon, every labored step he took in was in clear agony. His breath sounded like tearing paper. A light, cold rain began to fall again, which only made Scram break out into coughing fits. The soldiers thus far had shown no mercy to anyone, but they seemed almost respectful towards Scram, likely aware of his status as the odds on favor. Still, rules were rules. Scram had used up 2 warnings already during his coughing fit, and he was on thin ice. His friends tried talking to him to keep him alert, but Scram started slipping behind the group, a few yards at a time. Each time he fell back, a warning blared, and he summoned a burst of energy to get forward again, but pneumonia is unforgiving. Finally, south of Bangor in the late afternoon, Scram knew his time was up. Shivering with fever and barely able to stand, Scram decided to make an end on his own terms. In a quivering voice, he called Garrity and the others closer. "You made a promise, remember?" Scram wheezed. They nodded solemnly. Scram mustered a smile. Tell my Kathy I love her." he whispered. Then, in an astonishing act of defiance, Scram stepped off-road and sat down on the ground, on the shoulder, cross-legged. This was a clear violation, a self-chosen ticket. The soldiers raised their rifles immediately, and some spectators even gasped and screamed for Scram to get up. But Scram only lifted his head proudly and said, "I'm ready." Chest heaving, then the rifle spoke. Scram toppled over backwards, blood mixing with rainwater on the pavement. The rest of the boys marched past the bodies in heartbroken silence. Garrity wiped tears from his eyes. Scram's death hurt more than any other before it. The pack had been for nothing in the short term. None of them could save Scram's life, but Garrity swore that if he somehow won, he would keep his promise to support Kathy. The walk had officially claimed over 50 lives now, and each loss was cutting deeper into those who remained. After Scram's exit, a sombering moment fell on the rest of the competitors. They were now somewhere between Bangor and the capital city of Augusta, moving south. The third evening approached with the temperatures dropping again. Garrity's mind wandered dangerously as fatigue camouflaged itself as heavy drowsiness. He began to hallucinate fleeing shapes at the roadside. At one point, he was convinced he saw his father, who had been swatted by the government years before. So, years before, let me kind of explain this. Years before, Garrity's dad had kind of spoke out against the government and shit like that, and they came and took his ass away. And Garrity ain't never see his father again after they came and took his daddy away. So, in this, what is it called? In this dystopia, it's, of course, illegal to talk ill about the government. And if they find out, the government will take you away. Moving on. Garrity saw a hallucination of his father standing under a tree, beckoning to him. However, Garrity shook off the vision, but it still unsettled him. The line of the few remaining walkers was quite spread out. The strong ones led by about a dozen yards, while the stragglers trailed far behind under the vigilant eye of multiple half-tracks. Suddenly, as dusk fell, Garrity himself was hit with a critical crisis. He realized that he had been on autopilot for the last few hours when suddenly a sharp stabbing pain ignited in his left thigh. A full-blown motherfucking Charlie horse. Oh my God. Yo, when you are doing physical activities and a fucking Charlie horse hit, that shit is the worst thing in the world. Oh my God. Like, you don't even be expecting it. You be getting it moving and shit. You be moving and then boom, fucking Charlie horse hit like a thunderbolt and shit. But anyway, this Charlie horse hit him and it reminded him of the one that hit Curly on day one that ended up killing Curly. Garrity's leg seized up mid-step and he let out a strangled cry and almost fell. Instinctively, he grabbed the rock-hard muscle, but that only made him wobble more. In the few seconds it took for him to right himself, his pace had plummeted and a warning siren blared. Warning, warning 47, pick up the pace 47, but Garrity couldn't. He was in excruciating pain. His calf locked up in a knot. He lurched forward awkwardly, but he wasn't even able to reach 3 miles an hour. The first warning was followed by a second warning. Panic surged through Garrity. This is it. Is this how I'm gonna die? From a fucking cramp? He tried to move his leg faster, but it was like dragging a concrete post. Warning, warning number 47. Your third warning 47. The next 30 seconds would determine if Garrity would die from a leg cramp or live. Adrenaline flooded Garrity's system. With a primal scream, he punched his own thigh, attempting to loosen up the muscle. As the clock ticked down, 5 seconds, 4 seconds, Garrity gave one final desperate push and broke into a limping trot. Miraculously, the knot in his leg released just in time. He regained the minimal speed with perhaps 1 or 2 seconds left to spare before he punched his ticket. No ticket came for Garrity, not tonight. Garrity saved himself by a razor's edge. The soldiers lowered their rifles and the warnings reset. His slate was now wiped clean after a few hours of compliance. But Garrity had come within a heartbeat of being killed. He hobbled along, sobbing in a sigh of relief and pain, while McVrees and Baker patted his back encouragingly. Garrity realized that on the long walk, death could pounce on you at any moment, whether it be from exhaustion or bullet. But this was something as mundane as a muscle cramp at the wrong time. It was the narrowest escape of a contestant so far. In the aftermath of Garrity's near ticket, the few boys remaining tried to distract him and themselves from the specter of death, to keep Garrity awake and moving while working the stiffness out of his leg. McVrees prompted him to talk about anything. Garrity found himself blabbing about why he joined the walk, confessing that his mother had reluctantly let him go because the prize money could secure their future. McVrees shared a bit about his own family tensions as well, even hinted to how the scar on his cheek and an ex-girlfriend who gave it to him, a story that he never finished. Abraham admitted he'd entered the national drawing as a joke and never expected to be chosen. The conversation grew oddly intimate and even touched on taboo topics. At one point, McVrees made a teasing remark about virginity and suggested he might like it. You might like it if McVrees kissed him, which flustered Garrity greatly. Bro straight up say, hey bro, you probably would like it if I give you a kiss. You a virgin. Like, yo, what? Like, no. Anyway, it even made Garrity question his own masculinity and embarrassment. The others chuckled at Garrity's obvious discomfort, and in this way, it helped a few miles pass, them being together, resembling camaraderie. As the boys marched on, darkness fell on the third day, and as we know, when the boys start marching at nighttime, death is very close to follow. Well, death is for sure. Anyway, by now, only a few dozen boys were left. They had outlasted around 70 others. Those remaining were the hardest or luckiest of the original group. Many of the late death in day 3 had been quieter. Boys had simply collapsed from accumulated fatigue or drifted into unconsciousness and couldn't recover. But one more of the craziest death ever was about to occur. Okay, let's talk about Barkovich. As everybody knows, if you've been listening so far, Barkovich was the antagonizer of the group. And I said it myself that he had a good idea, you know what I'm saying? Like, yo, play little mind games and shit with them, have them go ahead and off themselves, you know what I'm saying? Or have them give up and you can eliminate some of the competition. Barkovich, though, he went after like weak, smaller people who he knew were gonna drop. He didn't go after none of the big boys like Scram, you know what I'm saying? He went after like heavier, slower people, you know what I'm saying? Wimpy people. But that isolation that they put Barkovich through, it really did something to his mind. Gary Barkovich was from Washington, D.C., and he, as I said, antagonized everybody from the start. Barkovich managed to survive through a combination of grim determination and a mysterious plan he often muttered about. By the small hours of day 4, very late into day 3, Barkovich was in bad shape. He had developed a wild, haunted look on his face. His earlier cockiness had eroded into paranoia. He flinched at shadows and occasionally cried out profanities aimed at no one in particular. The group still shunned him. Even though, Ray went over there, Garrity went over there. Well, Ray Garrity is his name, but they call him Garrity by his last name. Anyway, because even though Ray went over there and he tried to talk to him and he was like, yeah, man, so if Scram dies, we've all decided we were going to look out for his family. That wasn't enough human interaction. Bro is sitting over here fighting for his life, and he just wants some human interaction. If they, you know, talk to him and shit. But no, again, he wasn't prepared. If he had prepared for what was gonna occur, such as people shunning him and not wanting to talk to him due to his plan of dancing on everyone's graves and not talking to anyone and like, well, not talking to anyone, but by antagonizing other people and getting them to kill themselves, he didn't plan himself mentally for this to happen. So after midnight, a cold wind whipped across the road. Garrity and the others were idly taunting each other about fantasies of big steaks and warm beds. Barkovich, however, trudged along a short distance behind. He took offense. Perhaps they were mocking him. He started shouting at obscenities at a cluster of the boys in head of him. McVries barked back, "You shut your damn mouth, Barkovich. Nobody's talking to you." Baker tiredly added, "Why don't you eat your words and save your breath?" That shit made Barkovich snap completely. He screamed incoherently, "So what? You think you better than me? Y'all think you better than me? Use all will see. Use all will see." Garrity, still on the edge of his own brush with death, lost all of his temper and shouted over his shoulder, "Just die, why don't you, Barkovich? Give it a rest." Other voices joined in, hurling insults at Barkovich. The very boy they had ostracized, now being openly gloated. I don't know what the fuck I wrote here. By the remaining walkers. In their frustration and rage, Barkovich's eyes bulged. He let out a sudden high-pitched wail. Then, in an unforgettable act of despair, Barkovich filled his own dark prophecy. Now, when I heard this in the book while I was walking, while I was listening to this and I was walking, I worked in a mental hospital. Hearing that somebody can claw their own neck and rip their own throat out? How? He tore into his throat with his fingernails and let out a horrifying shriek. He clawed at his own neck until the blood gushed between his fingers. In that ghastly moment, Barkovich effectively committed suicide rather than have the soldiers have the satisfaction of punching his ticket. He collapsed on the pavement in a pool of spreading blood. The soldiers rushed in, but there was nothing they could do. Barkovich was gone. He ended his own life by his own hand. The gruesome spectacle stunned the remaining walkers into silence. Gary Barkovich, who vowed to dance on everyone else's graves, ended up digging his own grave. Garrity felt a pang of remorse. Maybe I meant to write pain. He felt a pang of remorse amid the horror. Their taunting had pushed Barkovich over the edge. McVries simply shook his head and softly said he wanted it. He wanted to go out his own way. No one disagreed. The remaining walkers stepped around Barkovich's limp corpse and marched on into darkness, deeply shaken. In the aftermath of Barkovich's death, an eerie quiet fell over the road. Even the crowd, what little there was at 3 a.m., seemed hushed, having heard the commotion. The night grew bitterly cold, and a drizzle turned into a pelting hailstorm in some stretches. The remaining boys trudged onward like zombies, each locked into their own private torment. The tragedy was far from over. As Barkovich had foreseen, the hours before the dawn had claimed many more. Those who had been barely hanging on now lost their will. In a particularly brutal hour, just before first light on day 4, 7 walkers collapsed in succession across several miles. They fell like dominoes, some crying for their mothers, others wordlessly kneeling over. The soldiers were busy that night. The rifles cracked over and over again, echoes through trees. Garrity stopped retching to the sound of gunfire. It had become as routine as a clock tolling the hour. He stumbled forward, half asleep on his feet, conscious only of staying in motion. By the time dawn broke on day 4, which was May 4th, so may the 4th be with you. No, okay. By the time the dawn broke on May 4th, the long walkers were reduced to a small group of the toughest young men imaginable. Only about 16 or 20 boys were still alive as the sun rose, though no official count was given at that moment. The relentless walk had entered its final phases. All right, so now we're on to day 4. So enough of me speaking nonsense. Let's get into it. The dawn on day 4 found the remaining walkers south of Bangor, trudging along the main turnpike, Interstate I-95, towards the capital city of Augusta. After 3 nights and 3 days of no sleep, the boys were in a state beyond exhaustion, a shambling, almost trance-like march. The morning light revealed their gaunt faces, chapped lips, and eyes ringed with dark circles. Of the 100 who started, fewer than 20 remained, though the exact amount fluctuated by the hour. Please note though, Patrick said around 20, but based on the book, it says that there were around like 46 boys left as they entered the turnpike on night 3. Anyway, the major staff continued to track them, of course, but no announcement of remaining walkers was ever made public. Still, the thinning ranks were obvious to all. Spectators that morning whispered in awe at how few boys were remaining in the running. The route took walkers off the back roads and onto a major highway for the first time, Main Turnpike, aka I-95, a direct shot towards Augusta. Walking on the wide highway normally reserved for vehicles was surreal. Military half-tracks leapfrogged to cover the front and the rear, and state troops had blocked off civilian traffic, so walkers had the whole road to themselves, aside from the occasional support vehicle. By mid-morning, the exhausted band reached Augusta, roughly 300 plus miles from the start. However, according to calculated maps, they hit about 3:06 near Augusta at around 1:30 p.m. on day 4. So again, shout out to Pat. As they approached the outskirts, a huge reflective sign overhead reading Augusta, 10 miles, giving Garrity a jolt. 10 more miles to the capital. Sometime after 8:45, Garrity noted, by 8:45, we'll be in Augusta. It was incredible that they had come this far. The governor's mansion, the state capitol dome, and the other landmarks came into view as they entered Augusta's city limits. Crowds had gathered here too, turning the occasion almost into a civil celebration. The boys walked through the state capitol with a police escort and throngs of people cheering them on. A banner hung over the street proclaimed Augusta salutes the final 40. So it was really 40 left. Though, in truth, far fewer than 40 remained by the time they arrived. Okay, so again, I put sources together. I also listened to the audiobook and wrote stuff down. So, for what I got from the book was Augusta salutes the final 40. Patrick is like, nah, it was less than 40. It was more like 20. So there is some kind of discrepancies there. But again, the book doesn't really tell you when all the boys drop. Sometimes during the book, it's like bullets rang out. They don't tell you how many bullets rang out. And Stephen King doesn't tell you exactly when all 99 boys died. So the numbers will be kind of fluctuating like that. So if you've been listening to this long, thank you for bearing with it. And yeah, let's get back into it. Because Patrick's like, okay, it's like 20 more deaths that are giving out going forward from here. But the banner says Augusta salutes the final 40. Anyway, though in truth, far fewer than 40 remained by the time they arrived. The remaining spectators yelled encouragement, threw confetti, and tried to hand the boys chocolates and soda. Some of the walkers mustered weak grins or waves. Others were far too gone to respond at all. One boy, totally limping, collapsed right in front of the Augusta post office. The crowd fell silent as the rifles rang out, and the boy was dragged off to the side. It was a sombering reminder that even here, in front of these grand government buildings, the Long Walk's law was absolute. You stop, you die. Garrity's mind was fading in and out as they left Augusta. He later recalled the city. He barely recalled the city at all. Just a blur of faces roaring in his ears. The major landmark he did remember was a green highway sign that read Portland, 60 miles, Kittery, 130 miles. Portland, Maine's biggest city, lied ahead, and just beyond that, Kittery, at the border of New Hampshire. The realization that they still had over 100 miles just to reach New Hampshire nearly broke Garrity's spirit. But a conversation with Collie Parker, still alive at this point, oddly lifted his spirit. Parker, the foul-mouthed boy from Illinois, had mellowed out considerably. After seeing so many deaths, Collie kind of went into himself. Collie asked Garrity quietly, "We getting any closer to your girl?" Garrity, doing some mental math, answered, "About 50 or 60 miles to Freeport, give or take." Parker managed a genuine smile and said, "You'll see her." This simple exchange seemed to steel Garrity's resolve again. He had to make it those 50 or 60 miles to see Jan at Freeport. He also wanted to see his mother as well. As late morning turned to midday, the walkers proceeded south on Route 202 towards Lewiston. The highway beyond Augusta was a gentler grade, and the weather was clear and cool. Also, it was a cloudy spring day. Even so, the strain was showing vividly. Every remaining walker was a study in agony and determination. Their pace sometimes lagged just above 4 miles an hour, dangerously close to triggering warnings, and the soldiers prodded them verbally to keep it up. By now, many walkers had accumulated warnings that they were desperately trying to walk off. Now remember, every hour that the walkers walk above 4 miles an hour, they lose a warning. So that's important. Anyway, no one dared risking a final warning at this stage. So now we're at the afternoon on day 4. The shuffling pack of boys reached the twin cities of Lewiston and Auburn, the second largest urban area in Maine. They had exited Route 202 to take Lisbon Street into Lewiston. The approach to Lewiston was marked by a long downhill, then a large uphill as well. As they crest the rise, Garrity could see a faint glow in the horizon. The lights of Lewiston was shining through a misty fog. The crowds thickened here once more. Many French Canadian families were turning out. Garrity saw in the signs saying French pronouns. Basically, it was saying, like, we speak French here. The boys were met with a wild reception. Chants of Garrity, Garrity, Garrity were heard shouting by many of the locals, proud of Maine's native very own Garrity. The boys were met with chants of Garrity, Garrity, Garrity. It was a bunch of locals proud to see their own Ray Garrity still in the race. Indeed, Garrity was Maine's very own, the last Maine boy in the walk, and the crowd's chanting gave him a surreal second wind. He stumbled onward, half delirious, imagining he must keep walking because of all of Lewiston is carrying on for him. Lewiston was far bigger and louder than any of the other small towns from before. The walkers went right through downtown Lewiston, straight down Lisbon Street. People packed the sidewalk shoulder to shoulder, leaning over police barricades, reaching out, trying to touch one of the remaining boys. On the far side of Lewiston, the walkers entered the town of Porterville. Now, Porterville is a fictional stand-in for Lisbon Falls in the novel. A thick fog rolled in from the Androscoggin River, I think I said that right, blanketing Porterville streets. The crowd here could barely see the walkers walking through the haze, but they continued on, chanting Garrity's name rhythmically since Lewiston. It was both motivating and unsettling. Garrity felt detached, as if he was watching himself in a dream. The route took them over the bridge, crossing the Ascoghi River, a wide, polluted waterway who smelled like shit mixed in with the fog. Partway across the bridge, for a blessed moment, the crowd noise fell away. Only the sound of the river below and the footfalls remained. Garrity savored this brief silence, because on the other side of the bridge, they were in for a steep incline. The hill proved extremely taxing. Several walkers nearly didn't make it up at speed. One boy collapsed halfway and rolled to the bottom. He was out of sight by the time the rifles fired, but everyone heard the gunshots echo. The rest somehow crested the hill and continued on. By now, it was late afternoon, early evening on day 4. At the top of the Brickyard Hill, the route merged into US 1 in the town of Freeport, Maine. Freeport was Garrity's home, and crucially, it was the place he expected to see his mother and his girlfriend Jan waiting for him. He had clung to the thoughts of this reunion for days. The approach to Freeport was electric for Garrity. He felt a flutter in his chest despite his deep exhaustion. According to the distance and time, it was around 2 a.m. on May 5th. So technically, we're into day 5 when they entered Freeport. The town was lit up like a carnival despite the hour. Banners reading "Welcome Long Walkers" hung across Main Street at this point. The count of walkers had dwindled down to just about 24 left in the entire competition. These few survivors greeted Freeport like returning heroes. Yet for Garrity, all the cheering faces blurred into anonymity as he desperately scanned for Two-Face Jan and his mother. Okay, so as I said, it's about 2 a.m., so it's into the evening, and they finally reached Garrity's hometown. So yeah, let's get into it. That hill, though, and I kind of like put an asterisk beside the hill. The hill that the boys had to climb was outrageous. Like, bro, how the fuck can you maintain 4 miles an hour going uphill? Oh my God, like just thinking about it, it's insane. But all right, Freeport marked a crucial point on multiple levels. When Garrity and the others staggered into the center of town, they found it packed with celebrations despite the pre-dawn hour. This historic Freeport town square was ablaze with lights from the television coverage and a sizable crowd, possibly thousands. All these people stayed up to await the walkers' arrival. Bands playing fight songs, vendors selling coffees and balloons, even at fucking 2 a.m. The remaining boys were now essentially celebrities. Their names, their backstories, it had now at this point been all over the news. Garrity, as the hometown favorite, received the loudest ovation. He could barely keep his head up, but he continued scanning frantically. Then, through the haze, he saw them. He saw Jan and his mother standing together on the sidewalk in front of Woolman's Market, which was a local grocery store that Garrity knew very well. Jan was holding a hand-lettered sign that said, "Ray, I love you." Garrity's heart leapt almost out of his chest. He veered towards them, tears streaming down his face. For a moment, he forgot the rule. Fuck the rule. He forgot danger. He forgot everything. Garrity stumbled into the center of the road and straight into Jan's arms at the curb. Jan, a pretty redhead girl, wrapped him in her embrace. Garrity's mom was sobbing, trying to reach for Garrity as well. Garrity mumbled, "It's okay, Mom. It's okay, I'm okay. Though he clearly was not. He sagged against Jan, attempting to stop right there and let it in. I can't go on. I just can't do it. He whispered in Jan's ear, willing to die in the comfort of her arms. It was so tender and heartbreaking. Oh, I wrote that. Why I write it like that? It was so tender and heart. Anyway, it was tender and heartbreaking. For a split second, the soldiers hesitated, unsure if they should interfere with this poignant reunion. Then a second passed. Walk 47, resume the Walk 47, blared loudly over the speaker. The crowd cheers turned to scream as they realized that Garrity was about to be shot in that instant. However, McVrees barreled over like a linebacker and seized Garrity around the waist and yanked him back onto the road, practically dragging him forward and saving him from drawing a warning. Jan cried out and tried to hold on to Garrity, but he slipped out of her grasp as McVrees propelled him forward. Garrity became fully aware of what happened a few steps later, a warning still echoing in his ear, but luckily it was not his third. He hadn't been shot. Once again, McVrees saved him. Garrity's mother fell to her knees sobbing as Jan stood in shock watching Garrity march away into the darkness just beyond the spotlight. Garrity himself was devastated. That brief touch of Jan and his mom had nearly broke him, and now he felt worse than ever, yet he was alive, still in this hellish contest. Okay, so one thing that I also wrote down is that during this whole part where McVrees is pulling Garrity away, Garrity is pissed off at McVrees. He's like, yo, why did you do it? You should have let me die. This suffering could have ended. And McVrees is like, so is that how you want to go out? You want to let them see you die? Imagine what it's going to be like for them if they watch you get shot right in front of them. Garrity, though, he let it go eventually, and he thanked McVrees for saving him. Twice, McVrees helped him, and he owed his life to McVrees. The remaining boys all murmured about the pact of non-interference. They would each stand or fall alone from here on out. So, and what I said was a little confusing, so I apologize. I don't know what the fuck I wrote. So, okay, so after McVrees saved him this last time, all the boys kind of like was walking, and it was like, you know what? From here on out, ain't nobody allowed to save anybody else. Nobody. That's a pact. From this point forward, if you fall, you stumble, you see your parents and you want to walk over and hug them, you're done. Garrity kind of was sad about this, but he understood it. He understood that each of them signed their own death warrant, and that from here on out, it's for keeps. This pact, though, it had immediate and disastrous consequences almost immediately. The psychological effect was profound. Each walker and now knew that if he stumbled, there would be no one there to lift him up. And so some almost willingly gave in. Not even an hour after leaving Freeport, as the sky began to lighten for the dawn of day 5, Collie Parker, number 45, the tough guy from Illinois, decided to test the new rule in a fiery way. Parker had always hated the soldier and had talked big about grabbing a gun and shooting their way out of the situation. Now, with the no help promise in place, Parker eventually felt free to act on his impulse. Since no one would stop him, he waited until a half-track drew close enough. Then he suddenly let out a rebel yell and charged directly at one of the armed soldiers. He yelled out, "Come on, you bastards! Let's finish this!" In other contexts, some of the boys might have, grabbed him like Garrity had done with McVrees to prevent his suicide by soldier. But under the new vow, everyone stood and watched. Well, they didn't stand, they walked and watched. I wrote fucking stood. But anyway, they walked and watched. Parker lunged at a sergeant and attempted to wrestle his rifle away. For a brief moment, it looked like he might actually do it. But Parker tripped over because of his exhaustion and clumsiness and fell to one knee. The soldiers did not hesitate to open fire and gun Collie Parker down as he was reaching for them on one knee. He died with a with a defiant grin on his face. Parker's revolution was dramatically over in seconds, and none of the walkers had moved a muscle to help or hinder. The crowd, yes, even at 4 or 5 a.m., there were spectators in these parts, gasped and fell silent as Parker's body was removed and the walk continued. Shortly after Parker's demise, Abraham, the boy who had suggested the no-help pact, also fell to a cruel fate as well. In the chilly pre-dawn air, Abraham had taken his shirt off as he began sweating during the brisk walk out of Freeport. Normally, a friend might have reminded him to put it back on or even loaned him a jacket. But under this new hands-off rules, no one said a word. As the hours grew colder and wetter, Abraham's body temperature began to plummet. He even began to shiver uncontrollably, but stubbornly kept walking without asking for help. By dawn, Abraham's teeth were chattering and he was very clearly ill. He had likely given himself a touch of pneumonia or hypothermia, just like Scram, thanks to the cold exposure. Finally, around 7 a.m. on day 5, Abraham's strength finally gave out. He stumbled and fell, shaking with fever chills. True to their promise, none of the other walkers reached out and tried to pull him up. Abraham struggled to rise on his own, but his muscles wouldn't obey. Within 30 seconds, he couldn't get moving. The soldiers gave him his third and final warning. Then they gave him his ticket. Abraham died on the roadside of Route 1, a victim of both the cold and the merciless pact that he himself had demanded. Garrity looked away as the guns fired. He couldn't bear to watch another friend die, due to something that might have been prevented if someone had given him a code. Okay, so now we're on the final part. Well, so day 5 is going to be extremely long. Okay, so if you're still watching this or listening to this, thank you so much for listening. It's been a long journey. Again, hopefully you've enjoyed some of this. Hopefully my voice isn't too annoying, me stumbling over my words, reading shit that I wrote, but hopefully you're getting some kind of enjoyment out of this. All right, so day 5, here we go. May 5th. Morning broke on day 5 as a handful of walkers continued south. They were now entering the most southern portion of Maine. The air was relatively mild. The birds were chirping at sunrise, which that's something that fucking pisses me off. Like, bro, like when I'm trying to sleep, I don't want to hear no fucking birds chirping. Like, not to get off topic, but them fucking birds be outside. I be like, yo, shut the fuck up. I'm trying to sleep in the day. Shit, it's only like 6 o'clock in the morning and you making all that fucking noise. That's why I gotta sleep with the fan on. But anyway, by 9 a.m., the Major's Jeep rolled by to distribute daily concentrates and rations for the 5th and final time, as they did each morning. The Major himself looked astonished at how few boys there were left to serve. He saluted them with a grave nod. No one cheered for the Major now. The remaining walkers glared at him with pure hatred or ignored him entirely. Soon after, a banner strung over the road proclaimed only 15 miles to Massachusetts. The realization that they were finally about to cross out of Maine meant the long walk nearly traveled the entire state by foot. Only 7 walkers remained by the time they approached the Maine and New Hampshire border, indicating that 7 incredibly hardy souls had made it this far. Late morning, the few survivors crossed into New Hampshire. The crossing itself was marked by a painted line and a welcome sign reading, "You are now leaving Maine. Welcome to New Hampshire." A modest crowd formed at the border and politely clapped, but it was clear that the spectacle was waning as the walkers dwindled. New Hampshire offered a roughly 18-mile stretch of US Route 1 between Maine and Massachusetts, a narrow neck of land that wouldn't take long to cover. This meant that the end game was approaching and approaching fast. At this point, the remaining known walkers, all right, so the main walkers that we know of was Garrity, McVries, Baker, and Stebbins. In any case, the 7 entered New Hampshire, but the number kept shrinking with each passing mile. In the rainy wind near Portsmouth, New Hampshire, one boy collapsed and brought his ticket, leaving 6. As daylight grew, the walkers noticed that Stebbins, the boy who had always hung in the back, the one who put on the moccasins and knew it was smart to wear bring 2 pairs of shoes, was now beginning to walk a bit closer to Garrity and McVries. In fact, on the morning of the 5th day, Stebbins finally decided to talk. Perhaps sensing the end, Stebbins revealed a shocking secret to McVries and Garrity. He claimed to be the illegitimate son of the major. So the person, okay, so this is like shocking to them, because the major is like this all-encompassing figure, and like he's the one who's putting all this torment on them and shit, or so they think he's the one who's putting this torment on them. And come to find out that you're his bastard son. Like, what the fuck are you doing here? The revelation hit Garrity and McVries like a bombshell. Stebbins explained in a cold, matter-of-fact tone that his prize for winning would not be anything you would usually want. It's not like he wanted a car or a house or a boat. You know, he didn't really do it for the money, but he did it because he wanted to be recognized as the major's son and be accepted into the major's household. This is what the major had promised him privately. However, Stebbins revealed something far more disturbing. He believed the major had set him up from the start of the race as a rabbit. In racing terms, a rabbit is a pace setter, meant to keep the speeds high and draw out the competition. Stebbins theorized that the major wanted the walk to last longer than ever for entertainment and record-setting purposes. So he put his son in the race with the instructions to go the distance. Indeed, the remaining walkers were entering alive in Massachusetts. This was the longest walk to date. It seemed to prove Stebbins' point. The major's genetic gift to Stebbins and the psychological edge of knowing the game was rigged had helped prolong the contest beyond expectation. Stebbins spoke of this with a mix of pride and bitterness, acknowledging that the strategy had worked, but also implying that he resented being used as a toy by his own father. Garrity and McVries were floored by these admissions. It made a twisted kind of sense. Stebbins' aloof strength, his cryptic confidence that he would win, with the major's peculiar glances at him during the walk. If true, it meant that the playing field had never been leveled. Around this time, poor Art Baker, number 3, began to reach his limit. Baker had been a dear friend to Garrity throughout the walk. Now on day 5, Baker was delirious and stumbling, kept alive only by his sheer camaraderie and personal grit. After hearing Stebbins' revelation, or perhaps he was too far gone to process it, Baker turned to Garrity with a peaceful smile and said, "Ray, I can't walk no more, man. I can't do this shit no more." Baker said softly he thanked Ray for being his friend and expressed contentment that Garrity was still in it. Garrity, alarmed, tried to argue and encourage Baker to keep going just a little bit more. Massachusetts was only a few miles away, but Baker had made his mind up. Perhaps he saw the writing on the wall with Stebbins' advantage, or perhaps he had simply had no strength left after 400 plus miles. True to the no-help pack, Garrity couldn't physically support Baker, and Baker wouldn't have wanted him to anyway. With a final friendly nod, Art Baker stepped off the road and raised his hands in farewell. The soldiers, who almost grown respectful in their dealings with the last few, gave Baker a final chance to reconsider. He did not. A single shot rang out and Baker fell, his journey over. Garrity shouted in despair as Baker went down, but he kept walking. He had to. Now, with Baker's death, the field had been down to the final 3: Garrity, McVries, and Stebbins. Okay, so we're at the final stretch. This has been quite the journey. The walk ends at about 420 to 450 miles. So let's get into it. In the final 3 in Massachusetts. Shortly after Baker's departure, the remaining trio crossed the border into Massachusetts. Cheers went up from the small crowds at the state lines, people astonished that anyone was still alive to reach Massachusetts. Indeed, it was unprecedented to have multiple walkers still going on the 5th day. Garrity, McVries, and Stebbins marched together into Massachusetts. Three soldiers of a war of attrition. By now, they've covered somewhere about 400 plus miles on foot. So again, the calculations may vary, but it was about 420 or 450 to the very end. Shout out to Pat again. All right. In Massachusetts, Route 1 had been more developed and become traffic heavy, though still blocked off for the walk. The trio moved through the seaside towns like Salisbury and Newburyport in the afternoon sun. They scarcely noticed any of the scenery anymore. Everyone had narrowed to the burning pain in their legs and a singular goal of outlasting the other two. A television helicopter hovered above at one point, broadcasting live footage of the final contestant. Garrity vaguely heard an amplified announcement that these were the last 3, and that one of them soon would be the winner. Spectators along the road in Massachusetts held their breath and watched in a mix of awe and horror as the boys looked like survivors from a death camp, hobbling yet somehow still able to maintain 4 miles an hour. Despite the rivalry, Garrity and McVries remained bonded to the end. They had each saved each other too many times and had been through far too much to abandon their friendship now. To keep themselves semi-conscious, Garrity began telling McVries a fairy tale as they walked, a nonsensical, meandering story about a boy who could outwalk death or something of that nature. McVries listened with a faint smile, clearly using Garrity's voice as some kind of tether to reality. Stebbins stayed a few paces behind, as his habit, silently enduring. He occasionally smirked at the two friends, but said nothing further about his plan or lineage. The sun was setting on day 5 as the final miles ticked by. The walk had stretched into the early evening of May 5th, astonishing everyone. A report had came out that the major and full honor guard were assembling ahead in the city of Danvers, Massachusetts, apparently ready to congratulate the winner whenever this ended. The grim dance continued on the highway. Okay, so first of all, they've been walking a long ass time. Some people can barely even drive that far without stopping, let alone walking. So now we're heading into the evening, and I want to say we're just about to the end. So let's get it. The 3 boys, Garrity, McVries, and Stebbins, had been walking for over 110 hours straight at this point. They were essentially running on nerves and reflexes beyond exhaustion, likely hallucinating and barely lucid. As Garrity droned on with his fairy tale to keep McVries awake, McVries began to falter. Pete McVries, Garrity's stalwart companion, had a distant look in his eye. He was literally asleep on his feet, if such a thing was possible, around 8 p.m. As they were passing through the outskirts of Danvers, north of Boston. So they're in fucking North Boston right now. That's fucking insane. McVries' pace became irregular. Garrity noticed McVries drifting to the roadside as if he was drawn by some phantom crowd. In fact, the roadside was lined with spectators cheering wildly. Perhaps McVries saw welcoming faces among them, and maybe he had simply reached his limit. McVries mumbled something to Garrity. It might have been, "I'm done, Ray." And then he stepped out of line. True to his earlier promise that he'd sit down when he couldn't go on, McVries gave Garrity a tired wink, and then he calmly lowered himself to the pavement and crossed his legs. He looked utterly at peace. Garrity, saying fuck that shit, he broke the no help rule in a promise of emotion. He lunged towards McVries to help him up, crying, "No, Pete, no." but McVrees gently pushed Garrity away with the last of his strength. "It's okay, Garrity," he whispered, with a faint smile on his lips. The rifle spoke one last time for Peter McVrees. Garrity screamed in grief as his best friend through this journey toppled over. A red bloom on the side of McVrees' shirt. The soldiers moved in efficiently, removing McVrees' lifeless body. Garrity stumbled, nearly going after him, but some deep survival instinct kept Garrity's legs moving forward. As he stumbled, he sobbed as he walked, realizing he was now one of the final two. With that left two walkers left, Garrity and Stebbins, an unlikely final pairing. The hometown everyman kid versus the eerie loner who said he was the major son. The media later dubbed it the farm boy versus the favorite. But in the moment, Garrity was barely aware of anything beyond the fact that McVrees was gone and he himself was still moving. The remaining crowd in Danvers, those who hadn't rushed off to see the major set up the finish line, roared at the spectacle of the final duel. Garrity's vision tunneled. Stebbins was just a blurred figure a few yards ahead now. Okay, and remember, Stebbins had actually taken the lead because Garrity kind of stopped when McVrees sat down. Garrity's mind was on the verge of collapse with McVrees gone. Something broke in Ray. He decided he could not continue in his hazy state. Garrity never reasoned that Stebbins was unbreakable. Stebbins had never even taken a warning in the whole walk. Stebbins shown no weakness. Stebbins could not be defeated. Garrity's thoughts sank into despair. Perhaps it was time to surrender and let Stebbins have the victory that he was so confident in. The soldiers and spectators were following closely behind the crowd, sensing everything was coming to an end. However, during this time, Garrity turned inward and found a strange calm. He was ready to die. He just wanted it all to be over. Mustering what little strength he had left, Garrity tried to call out to Stebbins and head at him. "Stebbins!" he croaked. Stebbins didn't turn though. However, Garrity pushed himself faster to catch up. A ironic burst of speed when he intended to quit. When Garrity drew alongside Stebbins, he reached out and touched Stebbins' shoulder. Stebbins finally glanced over at him, face drawn, eyes hollow. Garrity began to speak, intending to tell Stebbins that he, Garrity, was going to stop and concede, effectively handing Stebbins the win. But Garrity couldn't manage the word. At Garrity's touch and voice, Stebbins immediately jerked in surprise. He stared at Garrity with a look of absolute horror on his face, as if Garrity was the Grim Reaper coming to collect him. "Oh, Garrity! Oh shit, Garrity!" Stebbins raised his voice in an instant and snapped. Perhaps the knowledge that victory was at hand, or seeing Garrity on his feet when he expected Garrity to quit, was just too much for Stebbins. The tall, gaunt boy gave a shudder and clutched Garrity's shirt as he begged for help. Then Stebbins collapsed. He fell straight forward into the road unconscious before he hit. The shock in his eyes as he went down would haunt Garrity forever. There was a moment of dead silence, broken by the thud of Stebbins' body hitting the pavement. Garrity, he took one step, then another. He kept walking, all by reflex. But there were no more warnings, no more threats. The soldiers didn't raise their rifles at him. In fact, they were standing at attention. Somewhere behind Garrity, a great cheer arose from the watching crowd, and the loudspeaker blared, "Stop! Congratulations, you've won!" The major's voice, or maybe another announcer's. Garrity wasn't sure. He turned his head and briefly saw a swarm of people converging onto the road behind him where Stebbins laid motionless. They were shouting wildly and celebrating. It didn't register in Garrity's mind. He just kept walking. He was the last walker alive. He was the winner of the long walk. In that moment, he was an automation with no goal left. The major appeared, approaching him with a triumphant grin and an outstretched hand, ready to congratulate Garrity on his victory. However, Garrity ignored the major. He was looking ahead, deep down the dark, empty road, his vision buzzing. He saw a dark figure up ahead, perhaps another walker who hasn't fallen, or a hallucination of the recently departed McVries or someone else beckoning him onward. Garrity became dimly aware that the ordeal was over, yet he couldn't accept the fact that the walk was over. There was still someone ahead of him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch that person. He found that he couldn't stop walking even if he wanted to. The Major called his name louder, bewildered that Garrity wouldn't acknowledge him. Several officers tried to step in Garrity's path to halt him. However, Garrity swerved around them with surprising speed, running actually. Now that there were no bullets to threaten him, Ray Garrity, the winner, who no longer understood or cared, broke into a shambling run forward towards the phantom silhouette ahead. He was gripped by one single need, the need to catch that figure ahead of him. Whether it was real or not, didn't matter. And that's how the book ends. So, at the end of the book, again, Garrity wins. The Major comes out and attempts to stop him. Garrity's like, no, it's still somebody out there. He doesn't say it, he just kind of just walks around him ignoring him. Essentially, Garrity's mind broke because of the walk, because he lost his friend. Imagine losing 100 people who's walking around you in one day. You can't do anything, you can't say anything. Only thing you can do is just walk. That would break a teenage boy's mind, and that shit's crazy. So, why did I do this explain? Again, as I explained earlier, this book really helped me through those long nights walking around that mental hospital. This book is, of course, written by the great Stephen King. Shout out to Stephen King. I hope to revisit this topic once the movie comes out. The movie will be out the 11th of September, I think, or the 12th. Anyway, I'll be doing the explained on the movie as well once I get my grubby hands on it. No, but hopefully this kind of encouraged you to go see the movie as well. I'm really excited about this movie, and hopefully it's a good one. Also, I want to bring up a comment that one of my commenters made on the first video that was exactly what I was thinking. So shout out to Ready6518. He is absolutely right. The long walk is a metaphor for life. It continues with or without us. And that's facts. Like, as soon as he said it, that's exactly what I thought. And he's absolutely right. So shout out to you, Reddy. But thank you for watching. If you have watched to this point, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I am trying to grow this channel to 200 subs by the end of the year. But yeah, thank you so much and have a good one. Let's kind of end on a positive note. Like, let's be positive. Be a friend to someone today. You know, we all are going through things, and if you kind of look at it, life is a long walk. But again, my name is Star Verasis, and I'm out.